are live all over the country tonight as we are live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Twitch as we go behind the point spread. I'm Travis Justice, and over the next half hour, we are going to dig in deep to 4 key college football games coming up this season with my good friend, Dr. Rob Zatechka, and my good friend from Las Vegas, Scott Spreitzer. But before we get started tonight, let's give you kind of a rundown what's going to be coming up on the show, shall we? I do want to tell you with Betfred Sports, you can now get a free bet. That's right. The Doc Talk podcast is presented by Betfred Sportsbook, and you can get a free bet right now into the Apple and Google Play stores, downloading the Betfred Sports app. Create a new account, use the promo code DocTalk, and get a $20 free bet. That's good in Arizona, Colorado, and Iowa. Of course, we do want to remind you that the Doc Talk podcast, as well as Behind the Point Spread, and tonight's show is for entertainment purposes only. If you do have a gambling problem, please remember to call 1-800-GAMBLER. If you don't follow the Doc Talk Sports social media accounts, we highly encourage you to do so. You can now follow us and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Doc Talk Sports. You can like our Facebook page at Doc Talk Sports. Do you see the pattern here? It's pretty much all Doc Talk Sports. Same with Twitter, as you can follow Dr. Rob. Or I'm going to break it up here. You can follow me on Twitter at Travis Creates. We have a live call-in tonight. That's right. My son, Owen, is upstairs at the call screener as we speak. He would love to hear from you. And if you have a question for Dr. Rob, if you have a question for Scott Spreitzer, listen, this is a live call-in show. So if we don't talk about one of the games you might be interested in tonight, Scott might have some advice for you. I'm just saying, but 402-543-5556. That is the number to call again, 402-543-5556. You can also use the comment section on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook if you want to leave some comments in the social media comments, and we can get to those a little bit later on. So just to let you know, 402-543-5556. Scott Spreitzer is back with us again tonight. He is one of the smartest men that I know, and he's been making his living as a professional sports bettor in Las Vegas since he pulled out of Bellevue back in the 80s. And you can follow him at docsports.com. He's got a lot of good information right there. You can follow him on Twitter as well, at Scott Wins. But if you want to hear from Scott each and every day, text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022. And you're going to get a text link where you can have access to all the important pages like Scott's daily free pick videos, as well as a page where you can sign up and get $60 in Scott's premium member picks or only picks. Again, I got to spit that out. That's a little hard for me. I think Rob just opened a beer too. Again, text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 for more free picks from Scott Spreitzer. That is 7 days a week. And look who's with us. We got the whole crew back together again. Scott Spreitzer is the one on the top. Dr. Rob has much better lighting and is not using his phone tonight. So, Rob, you look really good. And we're going to make everybody who's watching on Husker Max and Nebraska fans really mad tonight because you're wearing a Michigan State shirt. And look what I'm wearing. Look what I pulled out. Look at that. Go Hawks.
Going to piss off all those Cyclone fans.
Well, see, we do this on purpose, Scott, just to let you know. We just, Rob has this affection for Sparty. Of course, people who listen to the podcast know me and my affection for the Iowa Hawkeyes. So this, we're like a confused bunch, and we do a Nebraska podcast. Go figure, right?
Well, if I can lose 10 pounds by next week at this time, I do have a Scott Frost jersey, but that might tick off some people too at this point. So I actually got it out of the closet and dusted it off a bit and said, I'm not fitting into this one.
You know, the funny thing, Scott, is before the game last week in Dublin, I went back and I took some clips from our show a week ago, and where you went in pretty deep on the one advantage that Northwestern had against Nebraska was Pat Fitzgerald. And man, that turned out to be true.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, Scott Frost, every time he coaches a game, he's likely to get out adjusted. And I'm not trying to be mean, jump on the bandwagon and slapping this guy around a little bit figuratively. But the bottom line is, he gets out adjusted. Now, having said that, they did score 2 touchdowns in the third quarter before Northwestern really got it together. They got it together because of that horrible onside kick, which was obviously about as Bush League as it gets. It's kind of funny. I've been in Vegas forever. We used to have a good football team. You'll remember Randall Cunningham, Ickey Woods, guys like that. They used to go bowling 9-3 every year, stuff like, good records, good solid team. And then for the past 25 years, they've been pretty bad. And I had people texting me last week saying that looks like something a UNLV football coach would do. Go up 11 in the third quarter and call an onside kick. So listen, he opened the door, and then it's tough to get the momentum back. And you got a brand new football team. You're trying to teach how to win football games. You throw something out there like that. Onside kicks in the NFL and college football hardly ever work, even when you need it to. Whether it's by surprise or whether you need it to work, it just is really putting you behind the 8 ball. I think Scott Frost ought to tune into you guys. Maybe he ought to take a seminar. I'm not kidding about risk reward when it comes to investing or sports betting. Might help him out on the sideline a little bit.
Hey, Scott, I got a question for you just about that onside kick. It's, what are your thoughts on the notion that if Nebraska doesn't do that, they kick it deep, Northwestern still takes that ball and goes the length of the field on them? I mean, at that point in time, Northwestern, they'd been running the ball fairly well, big chunk of the game. They hadn't really kind of converted and started punching it in yet. But at that point in the game, I thought Nebraska's defense was already looking pretty tired. And I kind of wonder if they kick it deep, Northwestern goes the length of the field, burns up even more clock, gets that defense even more tired out, still scores. I think it almost makes the game easier for Northwestern.
Do you? I thought that they would wear down in the fourth quarter by the look of the game. And like you're saying, I mean, they were getting knocked all over the place. You got a guy who's supposed to be your leader on defense, and he's getting his butt kicked by a tackle on offense, which it's not embarrassing in the fact that he's going to be a very good draft pick in the NFL when you're talking about the left tackle for Northwestern. So I do agree with you. The scoring wasn't done for Northwestern. But I think the mindset of the Huskers after that happened on both sides of the line of scrimmage, I think their mindset went south after that. And you kind of talked about it last week, Doc, when we went into the game last week, we were previewing it, and you said if something goes awry, this team could really fall apart and go down the wrong road, down the wrong path between the years emotionally. And we saw them get off to such a great start, but the defense wasn't where it was last year. They were getting pushed all over the place. Offense had no running game. And I do believe you're right. I don't know that Northwestern would have won the game because of one reason. They would have scored more points, but I think Nebraska might have two. They wouldn't have been in that mindset of here we go again, the players who were there the last few years around Scott Frost. So I do think for that reason, maybe they can hang on and win that football game. But whether they were going to or not, why do you open yourself up like that if you're a head football coach at this level of football? This is Bush League coaching. So I have a feeling, Rob, without putting words into your mouth, of, maybe Scott Frost didn't come out and say it, in his press conferences, or maybe he did and I missed it. But maybe he's thinking, you know what, we're not going to stop this team. Maybe we got to try to get the ball back, hopefully kick a field goal at the very least to go up 2 touchdowns. Is that kind of what you're saying, or am I reading that a little bit wrong?
Well, I just, I was thinking that was Scott's idea that it might be a case where, I hate saying this. You called it a Bush League call, and that's kind of what I was going to say next as well, too, is that I thought it was a Bush League coaching decision. And I hate saying that about Scott, but I think it's true. I don't think Scott was overly strategizing in the sense of, our defense is tired. Let me see if we can't get the ball back, because I don't think we're going to be able to stop these guys going forward. So we have to try an onside kick. I think Scott was sitting there going like, oh, we got him right where we want him. Let's try an onside kick, when he absolutely didn't need to do it. I was just saying, I think it was kind of a sort of, I guess the thing I was trying to say is that it was sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if you try the onside kick and don't get it, like what did happen, Northwestern gets the ball with a short field. You've got a tired defense. They go score. If you kick it deep, you still got this really tired defense. Northwestern's already established the run. Hall is running the ball really well. Your defense is getting pushed all over the place, like you just said. And now instead of them marching down and scoring on a short field, they march down and score on 75 yards and do it, and end up tiring that defense out even more. I almost wonder if it would have been worse if they kicked it deep.
That's a good point. It's a good point. No doubt about it.
It's a Bush League call.
Yeah, I get it.
So, Scott, I got a question for you because I texted this to you before the game started. When we did the show a week ago, the point spread was sitting at 13.5. We thought it was going to go up to 14. By Saturday, it had dropped all the way down to 10, I believe. What makes that happen? Did everybody's like, God, Vegas knew something? I mean, was it an evening out of the money? Why? Because we do got to dive into our 4 games because we got a half-hour show, but people do want to know how come it goes from like 13.5, 14, then boom, collapses all the way down to 10.
Yeah, the syndicates, as we like to call them, came in and bet heavily, which there's a whole lot of money, and it's respected money on a couple of games last week. Even after we did the show, Vanderbilt got more money. Illinois got ridiculous money after we did the show last week, going from 10, 11-point favorite all the way to 14 and a half. And then, of course, Northwestern got money on Thursday night. And it was basically a couple of big betting syndicates with respected money, deep pockets that came in and fired away. You're not going to see moves like that when it's a public bettor, when it's a so-called speak without, disrespecting, but the average Joe coming in off the street with a bunch of his buddies. Books might move it the other way when they see an average Joe come in and make a big bet, but it was respected money that came in. And you're going to, you see that more than ever before. I mean, when Rob was playing, Power 5 football at Nebraska, you didn't see lines moving 5, 6, 7 points. You never saw that, hardly ever, unless somewhere midweek, some starting quarterback who was heads and shoulders above his backup was knocked out of a game. Now you're seeing that several times a week. It makes betting, it makes handicapping a little bit more difficult. I'm telling you, the God honest truth here, that when all of a sudden you've got line moves that are taking place that are a good, 5, 6 points off the opening number, you got to think twice about some of these bets. I even texted you, Travis, last week. I'm like, my only big play here, my only play I decided to go with was Illinois. And I go, and I'm not real happy to see this number go from 10.5 up to 14. I really don't like it when everybody's on my side. I got away with it. I got away with it. They end up winning big, at a big second half. That's what that late in the week, and it's not a quarterback who's injured. It's big betting, respected syndicates coming in, pounded the heck out of the line. And it doesn't have to be in Vegas anymore. It's spread out offshore. It's spread out throughout the U.S. It's not so sexy. I hate legalized betting for only one reason, because I'm selfish, and it was so darn sexy to say I'm in Vegas at the sports book. It's not as sexy anymore to say that stuff.
All right, let's dive right into our first game, and you're already going to see a screw up because I put the graphics together and I got in a hurry tonight. But our first game is Memphis at Mississippi State. Ignore the money line; that's a game coming up. All right, but you got Mississippi State down in is going to be at home against Memphis. Is it -16? And with Mississippi State and Mike Leach and that pass-happy offense, the favorite, the over-under set at 57, Scott.
Yeah, I like the total here, guys. I'm not the biggest Mike Leach fan overall, but he does obviously know how to coach up an offense and get them to play at another level from what they've been used to under previous administrations. So he's in his, third year in Starkville. He's got his best offensive talent yet. I expect big things out of Seth Hennigan. He now knows the Leach system. He's the quarterback. Plenty of top-notch talent around him to run this Mike Leach system, and they believe in Leach. A lot of programs seem to do that the first couple of years, 3-4 years under Leach. Then they get tired of going 7-5 and pulling off one big upset, and he gets an extension for that. So, but for now, he's going up against a Memphis team that should put up points too. Remember last year, Memphis won that game 31-29 over Miss State, but the Tigers' defense can be had. The line has moved 6 points, by the way, guys, with Mississippi State. It's now up as high as 16.5. In fact, you could have laid 8. I'm looking at my notes here. You could have laid 8 at a book back in May with Miss State. They're now 16.5. I do have Miss State winning this game. I think it's going to be like a 41-24, 42-24 affair. That number's sitting at 57, that total. So I think we got some wiggle room. We got some wiggle room for a mistake to be made and not necessarily in a short field situation for the opposing offense. And that means that you can get away with a mistake or two, maybe a red zone field goal instead of a touchdown, and still get over this total.
You said something very interesting. That is getting in on a game early. For people who are new to betting or wondering about, hey, do I wait to the week before, the Saturday morning of? Because a lot of people, before wouldn't do their bets till 5 minutes before kickoff. It was like a deadline for a test or getting to school. But how much value can be found for a bettor, experienced or a novice, early on when those early lines come out?
Yeah, it used to be, I'm going to say the first couple of years I was doing this, basically for a living, it was a situation where I waited and stuff like that. And then I saw, man, I like 12 teams on Sunday night for next Saturday's games. And now I like 3 because of the way the lines have moved. And so now I'm one of those guys who, when everybody's watching the last quarter, or quarter and a half of an NFL game, I'm already starting to look at the lines popping up in college football for the next week. And I'll jump in on a handful of games by Sunday, late afternoon, early evening, where I'm already starting to jump in on games and make those initial wagers. And then, I just go throughout the course of the week. Like if I get a game that moves in my favor as far as the point spread is concerned by a couple of points on a Friday for a Saturday, I'll jump in. I do all my lines. Like obviously you can't do it for week 0 and week 1, but starting week 3, my lines for week 3, I will make my personal lines after the week 1 games. I don't wait for week 2. You don't want to be influenced too much by what you just saw. You want to take at least a few weeks of a model and put it together so you don't overreact. Public overreacts. As a bettor, you can't overreact to one game. And so that's what I do. So by Sunday, late afternoon, early evening, I've already popped probably 3 or 4 bets at least for the upcoming week in college football.
Yeah, and that's why you should text Doc Talk to 29022 to get that kind of expert advice each and every week with Scott Spreitzer. Let's go on to the next game. It's Boise State at Oregon State. This kind of has like a big game feel to it. I mean, I know it's not Ohio State and Notre Dame, but for some reason this kind of has a big game feel to it. I don't know why.
Well, it does for me because I got money on it. So they all feel all feel big to me in that instance,
Well, and you and I were talking earlier today. You gave me the line at -3. Betfred had it down at -2.5. So it's been fluctuating. There's a little movement here. Boise State on the money line at +120. Oregon State at -140. And then the over/under at 57 on this one as well.
I'll have to take a picture of my I'm doing this over my MacBook laptop. I'll have to take a picture for next week of my computers. I have 3 set up, a couple of the TVs in the office. And then on my big computer, or whatever you call it, your PC, I've got my line service, and I've got 25 books that I'm looking at all the time. So there's half a dozen books from Vegas, books from around the country, books from offshore that I'm looking at all the line moves. And right now, about 65% of those 25 books have brought it down to 2.5, and about 35% still have it at 3. I grabbed 3 with Boise State. Last year, they were 7-5. I like to look back at teams and see where their metrics, newfangled, old school metrics, all that kind of stuff, and see if a team that was 7-5 should have been 5-7, 4-8, or should have been 9-3 if you look at the numbers. And I'll keep it simple in this particular team as we analyze it. Boise State finished last year averaging 10 more points per game than they allowed, yet they were just, so to speak, 7-5. 17 starters back on the field, one of the most experienced teams in college football. They were sluggish early on last year, but they've got a coaching staff now with another year under their belts, and players know what they need to buy in on when it comes to this coaching staff. So they've got experience with play calling, experienced assistants, and 17 returning starters. Oregon State wasn't bad last season. The defense was a strength. It should be solid again this year, but that offense is shaky. They were -9 guys in the transfer portal. They lost 10 players to the transfer portal. They gained 1. That's an F grade for a Power 5 team. Offense has taken some hits. I think Boise, and listen, by the way, if I'm taking an underdog of 6.5 points or less than 6.5, let's say, I got to have a feeling that my team can win outright. And at +3, I do believe that Boise State can win this outright. I took the 3 for insurance. It doesn't always work out, guys. Last week we talked about Reno with 45 players off the roster from last year. They got outplayed by New Mexico State, but New Mexico State committed 5 turnovers, 2 empty trips in the red zone, and lost by 11. So it doesn't always work out. So discipline is the key to winning sports betting, just to let everybody know.
That seems like the theme, doesn't it? It's a theme around here, Rob, is discipline, isn't it?
Hey, stick to it. I found that interesting what you were saying about when you look at just kind of the transfer portal thing. Because, I mean, if you look at Nebraska, they should have been favored in that sense compared to a team like Northwestern. That doesn't always play out, does it?
It doesn't. Like, last week, I mean, New Mexico State, it was down to like 9 by kickoff or 8, I believe it was. And they ended up losing by 11. They had a bunch of guys coming back. Nevada had nobody coming back. Nevada wins and covers the spread if you got it late. Now, if you got it early, we talked about that last week where New Mexico State was as much as a 17-point dog early on. They covered. But the way they outplayed Nevada but made dumb mistakes, turnover after turnover, they probably should have won the game outright. That's where a lot of people are going against Nevada this week. They've dropped from 4 down to a 1-point dog as a 4-point favorite to a 1-point dog, now back up to a 1-point favorite at home against Texas State, because those who were betting saw that game and saw Nevada is not that good. They got a lot of help. Guys, real quick, if you want me to open some windows here, I can. We're starting to lose sunlight, I guess. It must be getting cloudy outside, but all of a sudden I'm fading into the darkness here.
You know, we're gonna have to get you. We're gonna have to get you a fancy light like I have and like Dr. Rob has. I'll have to send you one in the mail.
Lights. Give me 2 seconds if you want. I can flip
Well,
them
I'll
on.
tell you what. I will go to full screen to our next game because each and every week we're going to focus. We will talk about 2 games. We will always talk about the Nebraska game, of course, and we will also talk about the Iowa game. Why? Because, well, if you listen to the podcast, you know I have my affection for the Hawkeyes. I wear the black and gold, but this is not an easy game for Iowa to open up with. South Dakota State is going to Kinnick Stadium. The Jackrabbits ranked number 3 in FCS. You're talking about a team that played for the FCS national title a couple years ago. Iowa, I think a generous 15.5-point favorite. The over-under on this, 44.5. Scott Spencer Petras will be the quarterback for the Hawkeyes. Still, Hawkeye fans not sold on Spencer Petras as a starting quarterback. There's some youth in that offensive line. You've got Keegan Johnson, most likely not going to be playing for the Hawks because he's been dealing with an injury. Nico Reganey is going to be out with an injury. The defense is what is the glue of this team. Listen, I've said this all along, and Dr. Rob and I have had this conversation before as well. The top tier FCS teams can play with the best teams in college football. The difference is depth. It's not athleticism.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, you look at this line, it's 15.5, 44. Did you think 15 years ago that Iowa would be only laying just over 2 touchdowns at home to an FCS school? But listen, the books are saying 30-14. That's what they're saying by that final score in favor of the Hawkeyes. The Jackrabbits are an FCS powerhouse, as you guys know. And, man, they're dangerous, especially for a team without much of an offense, which is Iowa, only top 24 points in 5 of 13 games last year. It's all about defense and forcing turnovers, and South Dakota State only allowed more than 24 points in 4 of 15 games last season. The offense can put points on the scoreboard. They don't shoot themselves in the foot. They're 3rd in FCS in the rankings as we head into this week. So this is a good football team once again. They've covered 5 in a row, guys, on the road against FBS competition.
Wow.
They sneak up on you. Yeah, that's 5-0. Iowa's go against, final 8 games 6 times last year. They failed to cover the spread.
Rob, what year was it, Rob? A couple of years ago, South Dakota State went to Lincoln and gave shit. They gave Nebraska everything it could handle.
Well, everybody kind of gives Nebraska everything they can handle now.
Big State did, right?
Sorry, I couldn't help it. No, but I mean, for a lot of these teams, and this is something I'm sure we'll kind of get into at the Nebraska game, but you get some of these FCS teams when they go up against a Power 5 team. I mean, from a recruiting standpoint, especially when you look around the Midwest, these are huge games for these teams. I mean, a lot of these guys, when you look at the Nebraska kids, the North Dakota kids, when you look at the Iowa kids, the South Dakota State kids, a lot of these guys have played high school ball with and against each other growing up. This is when you look at the Jackrabbits, when you look at North Dakota, this is these guys' chance to kind of just absolutely shine here. And I mean, from a mentality standpoint, these guys got to be fired up, and that's got to play into this, I think.
I think so. I mean, I don't think it's so much anymore that you walk into a stadium and you're in awe. I think now you kind of fight for respect, and there's no more. You don't get the deer in the headlight look anymore.
Well, I don't think. I mean, if you look at some of these recent FCS versus Power 5 teams, I don't think there's a lot of sneaking up going on anymore. I mean, you look at South Dakota State I guess it was 2019. They played at Minnesota and nearly knocked them off. I mean, you mentioned Keegan Johnson. His older brother, Cade, had a kickoff return that got called back with a horrendous block in the back call. Never should have been called. But if South Dakota State keeps that one, they knock off a pretty good Gopher team in Minneapolis a few years ago. I don't think anybody's going to be really surprised if these guys come in and play a great game.
Hey, Scott, do you want to see a really odd compliment for the show we're doing right now?
I guess, yeah. What the heck?
So Eric says, this show makes me want to go to the Spearmint Rhino parking lot now. Do you want to know the story behind this?
Sure. I mean, we got those places out here too, but I want to hear it.
No, here's the funny thing. Because internet gambling is not legal in Nebraska because we're an ass-backward state, right? I mean, for some reason, we're morally righteous to where we can now have casinos. and we're going to be able to have sports gambling, but you can't do it online because for some reason that's going to influence somebody.
Travis, we're morally righteous to the point we got to go to a strip club to do our gambling.
So Scott, here's the funny thing. So you can only when we tell you to download the Betfred app, you have to do it in Iowa because bets are only accepted in Iowa. Well, you can cross the Missouri River physically, or you can go down Abbott Drive where the Spearmint Rhino is half in Nebraska, half in Iowa. So you can sit on one half of the parking lot of the strip club and place your bets. And I talk about that on the radio show, and I talk about that on the podcast all the time. I mean, if you don't want to drive, to the over the river, you can just easily drive to the strip club. So,
but you know what? Nebraska's a great place. Oh, okay, I don't want to promote anything here, but Nebraska's a great place for bookies, for Mont Paul shops down the street. Because I read a couple of years ago, and this is at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas where I'm reading it. I'm down there reading about, I guess, years ago after I left Omaha, Nebraska stopped really going after bookmakers. Now, you guys could correct me if I'm wrong. This is what I'm reading at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, downtown. And so if that's the case, I mean, again, I don't want to I'm just kind of joking around here with a little wink, but is somebody not making money if they open up online gaming in the state of Nebraska? You know how this goes. Well, I morally sound, right?
Here's the deal. I got my buddy Kelly. All right, yeah. my buddy Kelly's still a bookie, right? Okay. And I go, how are you still in business? And Rob, you know Kelly, right? You know Kelly. He goes, it's easy. He goes, because the old bookies still make it because they don't require money up front, right? I mean, it's still you pay and get paid on Tuesday. That's the way it works. So that's what they're doing. Let's go to our final game. It's the Nebraska game, of course. The Huskers at home to play North Dakota. Nebraska coming off the loss. Huskers a generous 21.5-point favorites. That over-under at 48.5, Scott.
Can I just start by saying this? I think Nebraska's quite lucky they didn't schedule South Dakota State and left them to Iowa City, because Iowa can maybe escape with an 8 to 10 point, 14-point win. I'm not so sure Nebraska could have. And, to use Rob's analysis last week, if they're playing the Jackrabbits and fall behind 7-0 with a couple of 3-and-outs or down 10-0, they might not recover against that football team. The thing about North Dakota, they're missing 5 letters from being a team that can beat Nebraska. That's STATE at the end of their name. Because if this was North Dakota State, they could go in and beat Nebraska at Memorial Stadium with Scott Frost and some of his coaching. I mean, if Scott Frost was a baseball manager, it looks like he'd pull a starting pitcher with 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth, a no-hitter going, and nobody on base. It's a little scary. But anyway, as far as this week, I think Nebraska will get the win. I'm not going to lay the 21.5. The total's seated at 48. I really do believe this could be a 42-16 type of football game. Here's what will probably happen with North Dakota. First of all, Rob hit it on the head. They're motivated organically coming into this game. You don't have to do coach speak. You don't have to do all that phony stuff in the locker room. They come into Memorial Stadium going, man, we're going to play our tails off. These guys aren't that much better than us, even if they are. And they're going to go in there with that mindset of we're going to play the game of the year right here, where Nebraska's thinking about last week, got Oklahoma coming up in a couple of weeks. This is it's just tough to get up for, I would think, for the Huskers, other than the fact that they want to bounce back from last week. North Dakota's rated outside of the top 40 in FCS. This isn't the Jackrabbits. This isn't North Dakota State. They lost their top running back. They lost their top offensive lineman. He's now in the NFL. And I really do believe that Nebraska will get the better of them here. But I think it's going to be like we saw out of North Dakota. I believe it was Utah State they played at last year. They started out well, and then the talent gap just took over, and slowly they wore thin throughout the second half. Wouldn't be shocked to see a somewhat close game at halftime, and the Nebraska just wears them out. But this press conference by Scott Frost saying we've got to get creative. How about just running the basics and getting fundamentally sound first? How about somebody holding their block on a freaking running play? Cam Jurgens, I dogged the guy a little bit his freshman year because he couldn't get the ball to Martinez when he snapped the ball. It was a little bit unfair to him because he was a tight end, right? And so look at him last year. Look at him what he's doing in preseason this year. That guy's knocking guys 8 yards downfield and still blocking, basically. Can somebody hold their block? I mean, listen, I'm not a Power 5 football player, but I can see what's going on. You don't have to have brain surgery to become a brain surgeon. And I'm watching that last week, and I'm just scratching my head. Block.
Well, and that's one of the things I look at I look at what Nebraska did last year against Fordham. And I thought, I hate saying this. I thought Nebraska was a better football team last year after one or two games than what we've seen after one game from Nebraska this year. I think the offensive line was definitely better. I'm not saying – I think the special teams are better this year. And again, we got a one-game sample. But Fordham came in and that game was close until really late in the second quarter. Nebraska got, I think it was one or two turnovers, and it kind of got out of hand for Fordham. But Fordham played really good football, and they were not a very good FCS team last year. And that's why I look at a team like North Dakota, and it worries me. Now, again, I don't think Nebraska loses this game. You talked about the talent gap. I think they wear down. I think they get tired. But I don't think it's going to be this blowout win for Nebraska, where Nebraska just utterly dominates what you'd expect against an FCS opponent.
And well, this kind of leads us in. And Rob, I'm covering you up right now. I don't mean to do that, but Jason says, are games like the Nebraska North Dakota ones one to avoid due to the unpredictableness of an FCS opponent? I know most games are unpredictable, but something about an FCS opponent seems to make that bigger, in my opinion. And by the way, Dr. Rob, enjoying the academic decathlon.
Nice.
So, question: do you stay away from these, Scott, when it's FCS, FBS?
No, I still handicap the games. There's point spread. That's the almighty equalizer, is the point spread. And so I will have power ratings on these games too. The thing is, I got Nebraska right where they are. I made them 22. They're 21.5.
Yeah.
And again, I got one team in North Dakota that comes in without any motivation issues. It's all organic. They don't have to be pumped by a bunch of garbage in the locker room, phony words. Nebraska comes in with a lot of questions between their ears. This could be a 42-16 game. This could be a 24-14 game. I don't usually have that big of a variance between what I think could happen in a game. But if Nebraska shoots them, this analysis that Rob gave us last week about if they come out and they're screwing up in the first quarter, which they had a great drive out of the gate, but if they're screwing up in the first half, let's say, keeping this close, they start doubting themselves. I don't want to mess with a team that's still in doubt mode and not confident. And we may see that out of this team. They'll win the game. I just don't want to lay the points.
See, this is the point. This is the thing now is you've got Nebraska is hands down. They're the unpredictable team.
True.
You're the one you don't know what you're going to get from these guys.
So true. And that's why we've been diagnosing it all week long on the Doc's Diagnosis presented by Centris Federal Credit Union. If you missed any one of Doc's 3 plays diagnosis, you want to go to the YouTube channel and check them out. Just go to YouTube/Doc Talk Sports. They're right there. The Doc's Diagnosis, brought to you by Centris Federal Credit Union. We're going to do 3 plays each and every week. That means 3 more plays coming up next week against North Dakota. We show the good, the bad, the ugly, but you really get a good X's and O's version of Doc's Diagnosis, presented by Centris Federal Credit Union. Dr. Rob, just to let you know, Steve Swanstrom, President and CEO of Centris, stopped by today at the office, gave a lot of beer. A lot of beer. We got some beer coming, dude.
Did he make a Wisconsin run?
He did, and we got some different.
Nice.
Of course, Scott's generous enough to come on every Wednesday night with us. We hope he has fun with us. You can read all the stuff at DocSports.com. Follow him on Twitter at Scott Wins, and you can work with Scott, get some good advice from him. Text Doc Talk to 29022. Now, when you get that, you're going to get a link to have access to all his important pages, such as his daily free pick videos, as well as a page where you can sign up and get $60 in Scott's premium member-only picks. Again, text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 for more free picks from Scott 7 days a week. Of course, you can get a free bet with Betfred Sports. Download the brand new Betfred Sports app on the Apple and Google Play stores. Create a new account. Use the promo code DocTalk to get $20 in free bets from Arizona. That's going to be active in Arizona, Colorado, and Iowa. Of course, today's show is for entertainment purposes only. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Before we let you go, Scott, I do want to know the most outlandish stat. I asked you this, and I don't know if you're ready to give this or I have to read it, but this stat is effing crazy. It really is. It's impressive, and it's a reason why you said don't tease college football. If you like teasers, it's a sucker bet, but tell us why we do not tease college football.
Yeah, I love 2-team 6-point teasers in the NFL, but college football is a different animal. So we'll go back, and this is a database that I go through with a good friend of mine, a bettor by the name of Big Al McMorty, and I got to give him a little credit for this too. Because
hold on, Big Al McMorty. If that's a gambler's name, I don't know if I've ever heard a gambler's name like Big Al McMorty.
Big Al McMorty, man, and he's probably Rob's height. Rob would kick the crap out of him 6 days a Sunday, but he's a big guy. But listen, the last 7,381 college football games, which goes back a decade. Wow. There have been only 118 pushes against the spread, and we're talking about against the closing line.
That's it? 118
against the closing line out of 7,381 games. That's 1.5% of all college football games where the margin lands on that closing point spread. Only 3% of those 7,300 plus games, or 230 games, have landed within a half point of the point spread in college football over the past 10 years. The average margin, and this is why you don't play teasers in college football, there's no value. The average margin of a final score from the spread, not just average margin of team A beats team B, but with the spread included, the average margin against the spread, 12.43 points per game. 7,300 game sample size. We're not talking about, clouds are shaped like a cigar, and when a team is playing under clouds like that, they're 14-7. This is serious stuff. So give respect to key numbers in college like 3, 6, 7, 10, 24. Those are key numbers in college football betting. But don't get so caught up in it that you suffer paralysis by analysis, as I like to call it. Go in there thinking that, listen, I like this team at +4. They're down to 3. I'm throwing them away. You got to respect those key numbers of 3, 3.5, 4. But at the same time, I just gave you a sample size of 10 years, 7,400 games, where more often than not, you're going to be okay as long as your handicapping was right. You're not going to get beat because of a half-point move. Now, having said that, I'm probably going 0-3 with games that are decided by half a point on Saturday this week.
Hey, before we let you go, Rob, Jacob has a question. He says, how can this team, or any team for that matter, overcome their mental weakness? Seems like that's their main issue. I think there's more issues than that, but everybody wants to point towards the mental issue. How do they get over that? And thanks for the question, Jacob.
That's a tough question. I mean, first off, they've got to be able to win a few games. They've got to start doing it consistently. When you're winning 3 to 5 games a year, that's not going to happen. You've got to have some consistent success. You've got to win 7, 8, 9 games a year, and you've got to do it kind of consistently year in and year out. I mean, this is a Nebraska team that, you look at last year, and I think last week we even talked about the Iowa game last year, how deflated the stadium was, the team was. I mean, you could hear the wind sucked out of the fans watching the Iowa game on TV last year when Iowa blocked that punt, ran it in for a touchdown, and Nebraska was still ahead by a touchdown at that point. But you just knew the game was over because of that mental weakness. And you saw the same thing. I mean, I think Scott commented on, whether or not Northwestern scores on a short field, scores versus a long field. The bigger point with that blocked kick was that, here we go again mindset that Scott pointed out that was probably the bigger detriment for Nebraska in that game. It's hard to overcome that.
All right, so here's the deal. We're going to be back next Wednesday, same time, same YouTube channel. But remember, you can call into the show. My son's working his ass off upstairs being a call screener, and nobody's calling. This is a call-in show. You can actually call in.
A beer
he's drinking a beer. He's working his ass off. He's got the setup. He looks like a regular radio producer. I want people to talk to Owen when they give him a call. Hey, Scott, thank you so much for your time again. Great stuff as always. I hope you're having fun with us because it's
absolutely
all fun.
It's a blast. Yeah.
Excellent. Just a quick reminder that you can follow Doc Talk Sports all over the social media channels. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Doc Talk Sports. Like our Facebook page at Doc Talk Sports. Follow Dr. Rob on Twitter at Doc Talk Sports, and follow me on Twitter at Travis Creates. This has been Behind the Point Spread. We'll be back next Wednesday, 8 o'clock. If you got a question for Dr. Rob, just send an email, doctalksports@gmail.com. We'll see you next week.